Next, from Springfield, we sit down with Representative Barbara Flynn Currie and discuss two proposed bills to solve Illinois' $1.6 billion budget deficit. Representative Currie also talks about the closing of safety net hospitals and other programs that she believes will be cut should Governor Rauner's FY 2016 budget pass. This runs about 15 minutes.
Representative Barbara Flynn Currie, thank you so much for joining us here on the Illinois channel.
Happy to do so.
All right, so we have this budget deficit for fiscal year 15.
The current budget year, yes.
And a few days ago, well, a couple of days ago, the House, took two bills to fix that hole. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Sure. The substantive bill, the main bill, said that we would, to solve the $1.6 billion gap, and that's a significant gap, that we would use monies that were sitting idle in a variety of state separate funds, and that came to about $1.3 billion, and that we would make cuts, across the board cuts of 2.25% on all state agencies, almost all activities, and that would give us an extra $300 million, which would close the budget gap. We needed to spend some of that money to pay for child care programs for the remainder of the fiscal year that ends June 30th, to pay court reporters who were also running shy of their paychecks, and to make sure we had enough money to keep the correctional guards up to par in terms of staffing levels. So that was what we did. What that means is that we start the next fiscal year without first having to find a way to plug the holes that we left in fiscal 15. The downside is that $1.3 billion didn't come from sources that are going to be available when we start fashioning the budget for the budget year that begins July 1st, 2015, because that was a one-time only proposition. So it isn't as if we've now set the stage so that we can sail into fiscal 16 discussions without expecting pain and cuts. The pain and the cuts will be, I think, very significant unless we find a way to find some new revenue.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, with these two bills, it will entail fund sweeps and
that's the money that was sitting in these separate funds in the state treasury, unused and unneeded.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Well, as I say, I think it was quite a legitimate thing to do. The good thing is that meant we didn't have to make $1.6 billion worth of cuts to real programs that serve real people, vulnerable populations, fragile populations. But it also means that since that money won't be available in the next fiscal year, that it isn't as if we gave ourselves a cushion for the fiscal 16 budget. We're missing $1.3 billion when we start off. I should mention also that the mental health programs for the developmentally disabled, programs that serve children with autism, they were not subject to the 2.25% cut, 2.25% cut. And in addition, because we don't know what the impact of some of these cuts will be, we did give the governor some additional spending authority, $90 million additional money that he can use in agencies where problems develop that we did not foresee. And when it comes to school districts, there is a concern that some school districts across the state might be in really parlous shape. So we gave the governor a $97 million fund that he could use if those school districts are coming close to closing their doors.
Right, and that's supposed to be for needy schools, correct?
Very needy schools. It isn't a program that's going to add really important programs, but not essential programs like art and music. It is meant to say that if a school district is close to shutting its doors, then they can apply for grant money to help them over the hump.
So as we speak right now, the Senate is in session, and that plan is supposed to be called up.
We expect that will be approved by the members of the Senate.
Okay.
And it did represent an agreement between the governor and all four caucuses. So I think that the votes will likely be there in the Senate as they were in the House. But I just want to caution that the degree of pain in the budget bill solving the current budget problem, the degree of pain is not what it's likely to be in the next fiscal year unless we find new revenues. We solved more than 80% of our problem with one-time revenues that won't be available next year, but do not cause any pain to anybody.
Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that? What exactly do you mean?
Well, what I mean is that the cuts that we made, $300 million worth of cuts, those are real cuts to real programs. They're cuts to nursing homes, they're cuts to the program that helps the elderly stay in their homes, home services, for example. Those are real. But $1.3 billion of the solution lay in these special funds that are sitting in the state treasury that weren't needed for their original purpose. So using those dollars doesn't cause any problems for people who are reliant on state services. The $300 million does. So when we go into budgeting in fiscal 16, we can't use that $1.3 billion. We've already used it. So unless we find new revenues, the cuts are going to be a lot harsher, a lot harder, and hit a lot more people than the cuts that we imposed in order to solve the problem of the current budget year. So more than 80% of the solution to this year's budget shortfall came without causing any harm to anybody.
Okay. And the 80%, the fund sweeps.
Yes.
Will it have to be paid back?
No, does not have to be paid back. Those funds replenish themselves on a regular basis, and our understanding is that the monies that we have used to solve this year's problem were not intended to be used for other programs. We reserved in those funds monies that we knew were going to be essential to serving the purposes for which the funds were created in the first place.
Okay. And let's talk about some of the programs that this money is going to go towards. The Child Care Assistant Program, court reporters. How soon will those
and correction guards? Yeah.
Okay, how
well,
soon
I
will those funds?
anticipate the governor will sign the bill the minute it hits his desk. Mm-hmm. He knows what's in it. He was part of the discussions, so there's no reason for him to delay. And once he has signed the measure, then I think the money will begin to flow.
Okay. And let's switch to speaking about fiscal year 16. Mm-hmm. What are your impressions? What needs to be done to tackle that?
Well, the governor has proposed very significant cuts in fiscal 16. For example, the cuts he is proposing from the perspective of the hospitals that serve low-income people, poor people, Medicaid clients. My understanding is that some of the safety net hospitals on the south side of Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, are likely to close their doors if the budget goes through as the governor proposed it. So you're looking at very significant pain to a lot of people. That's one example. But when it comes to the home health care program, the program that keeps disabled people in their homes, providing them services, the governor proposed significant cuts there as well. So the problems facing the people we have served in the past, including in this year, those programs are going to be cut significantly unless we can find some new revenue. Now, as you know, the governor has said he's not much interested in new revenue, mm-hmm. but I don't understand how the governor can sit idly by while people who have been able to stay at home because they had people who provided them personal services, suddenly they're not given those services. What do? Do they go into a nursing home? They probably can't manage on their own, or they wouldn't have had that service in the first place.
Okay.
So we would argue that there are costs down the road if you suddenly pull out from under the programs that were helping people be independent and self-sufficient.
Okay. So you're recommending to raise taxes, or? To
find new sources of revenue, and many had argued that we should have retained the surcharge, the income tax surcharge. Suddenly, just because we came to January 1st, 2015, didn't mean that the needs were gone and that the money that provided wasn't essential to shore up services. So I would have been in favor of extending the surcharge. I was never in favor of pretending it was only a temporary fix. Others have proposed, in fact, the current governor during the campaign talked about expanding the sales tax base, which in Illinois is primarily a tax on goods, stuff you buy, into the service economy. And the argument is that in the 1930s, when the sales tax came in, people bought stuff. They didn't buy services, so they bought a lawnmower. Today they buy lawn care services. So people were accustomed to doing a lot of things for themselves that today we hire people to do for us. Most states, including the states that surround Illinois, tax a much larger number of services than Illinois does. So that's one place to look for additional revenue.
Okay. Speak a little bit about the dynamics between the General Assembly and having, you know, a Republican governor in over 10 decades.
Well, we've had Republican governors. In fact, I've served with Republican governors. I served with Jim Thompson, with George Ryan, with Jim Edgar. In fact, more Republican governors than Democratic governors. The only other Democratic governor that I've served with, besides Pat Quinn, was Rod Blagojevich, and as you know, he didn't stick with us throughout his 2 terms. So I don't, there's nothing that's impossible or even hugely difficult about dealing with Republican governors. Governors have priorities, legislators have priorities, and generally we end up recognizing that the priorities of each of us play a role and deserve some place in the budgets that we create, in the programs we support. And I'm hopeful that Governor Rauner will prove to be amenable to those kinds of discussions, those kinds of negotiations, as his Republican predecessors were.
Okay. Do you think that he's just focused too much on the business aspects of the state and not so much on the people?
Well, paying attention to the economic climate of the state is certainly important. I would disagree with Governor Rauner in that I think that our business climate is pretty good. We have, in fact, we're one of the favorite homes of the Fortune 500 companies. We've had a lot of headquarters moving to Illinois from other places. We have a very skilled, highly skilled workforce. We have good access to transportation, to other kinds of infrastructure that is important to any kind of business operation. So I think we start from a pretty good place. I'm willing to work with the governor if there are things we can do and should do to improve our opportunity to encourage businesses to come to us, to encourage more hiring, of course. But I think we start from a pretty good place, and I'm anxious to hear what specific ideas he has.
Okay.
But I also think that people are what is the bulk of what Illinois government does, and serving people who have particular needs, the aging, the special ed kids, the vulnerable in nursing homes. These are really important programs, and we cannot turn our back upon them.
Leader Currie, is there anything else you'd like to add to this discussion?
I think you've done a good job of covering the waterfront. So I think we're in good shape for the current budget year. I think we can manage our way through to June 30th. And I think it's a new ball game come July 1st, and I think we have our work cut out for us. I think we're all ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us here on the Illinois Channel.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.